Let me tell you about a Tuesday morning that nobody in that building will ever forget. Not the security guard who was scrolling his phone at the front desk. Not the woman in accounting who had just microwaved her second cup of coffee. Not the three men in the elevator who were laughing about something they'd seen on the weekend, shoulders loose, ties not yet tight. The easy comfort of men who believe themselves to be safe in their positions. None of them will forget it. But the one who will carry it longest, the one who, years from now, will still wake up on certain mornings with the weight of that day sitting on her chest like a stone, is a woman named Nadia Reyes. She was sitting alone in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of Ellison Partners at 7:22 in the morning, 45 minutes before anyone else arrived. The desk in front of her was spotless, as it always was. The files were in order, as they always were. The calendar had been updated, the coffee had been started, and the stack of correspondence that needed handling before the 9 o'clock calls had been sorted into 3 clean piles. Urgent, pending, review. Exactly as they always were. And Nadia was crying. Not the kind of crying you do when someone is watching. Not the kind that comes with sound and performance and a tissue pressed dramatically to the face. This was the other kind. The quiet kind. The kind a woman cries when she has been holding something for so long that her body simply gives out before her will does. Tears coming without permission, running fast and silent down her face while she kept working, kept sorting, kept doing the thing she had come to do, as if the grief were just weather passing through and the work was the only real thing left. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't notice the man who stepped into the outer office, stopped when he saw her through the glass, and stood very still. She didn't know that the stranger watching her from the doorway was the one person in the world with the power to change everything. She didn't know because she'd never seen him dressed like that. Underscore. If this story is already finding its way into your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to Mama Told Me. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. Mama always said kindness travels farther than you think. To understand what happened in that building, you have to understand who Nadia Reyes was before you set foot inside it. Because some people look like the background of a story when they are actually the whole point of it. And Nadia was the whole point. She was 38 years old. She had been the executive secretary to the CEO of Ellison Partners for 9 years. 9 years of 7 a.m. arrivals and 7 p.m. departures, of knowing every board member's name and their assistant's name and the name of their assistant's dog, of understanding the rhythm of a company the way a ship's navigator understands the sea. Not because someone told her to, but because she had decided a long time ago that if she was going to do something, she was going to do it completely. She had a daughter named Rosa who was 8 years old and who liked collecting rocks and refused to eat anything orange. She had a one-bedroom apartment on Mercer Street with a window air conditioning unit that worked most of the time and a radiator that knocked in the winter like it was trying to get out. She had a car with 180,000 miles on it that she talked to when it was struggling up hills, encouragingly the way you talk to someone you need just a little bit more from. She had $47 in her checking account until Friday and a credit card that was holding its breath. She had no one else. That was the part nobody at Ellison Partners knew. That she was doing all of it, the job, the daughter, the apartment, the car, completely alone. Rosa's father had been gone since before Rosa was born, which is a whole other story and not one Nadia told at the office. She had a brother in Phoenix who sent $100 on her birthday and called twice a year. She had a neighbor named Mrs. Petrov who watched Rosa when Nadia's hours ran long, which they always did, and who charged $40 a day and never once told Nadia that $40 was not enough for how many times she'd done it. She had her job, and for 9 years, her job had been the one thing that felt solid. This is the part that matters. Nadia Reyes was not just good at her job. She was the kind of good that makes everyone around her look better than they actually are. She caught the errors in the quarterly reports that the analysts missed. She remembered that the VP from the Singapore office couldn't eat shellfish and made sure the catered lunch didn't have it every single time, without being reminded. She knew that the CEO, Marcus Ellison, took his coffee black with 1 sugar until March, and then switched to no sugar every spring without explanation. And she had simply adjusted without comment because it was her job to notice things and make them easier, not to be noticing. She had met Marcus Ellison exactly 41 times in 9 years. She knew this because she had processed every meeting request, confirmed every appointment, and prepared every briefing document for each one. He was courteous in the brisk way of men who are always thinking about the next thing. He said thank you the way people say it when they're already walking away. He once told her she ran the best organized office he'd ever seen, and she had said thank you, and he had moved on to the next item, and that was the longest personal conversation they had ever had. She did not resent this. She was not naive enough to resent the structure of things. She understood her position clearly and with no illusions. She was the mechanism behind the door, the unseen part of the machine, the thing that made everything work so that the visible people could appear to be working. What she had not understood, what no one had told her because no one thought she needed to know, was that 4 months ago, Ellison Partners had promoted a woman named Victoria Shaw to Vice President of Internal Operations. And Victoria Shaw had decided, within the first 2 weeks of her appointment, that Nadia Reyes was a problem. Not because Nadia had done anything wrong, but because Victoria Shaw was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately identified every person in it who was too good at their job to be managed easily. And Nadia, without trying, without performing, without even being fully present to the politics of it, was exactly that. The campaign against Nadia had been quiet and persistent, the way cold water erodes stone. Not dramatic, not sudden, just relentless. Workloads doubled without acknowledgement. Small errors that were not errors were flagged in writing and copied to HR. Nadia's long tenure was referenced in meetings as a reason to consider fresh perspectives. New protocols were introduced that added 2 hours to every existing process, and then, when the delays inevitably resulted, Nadia's department was noted as underperforming in the weekly metrics report. It was the most ordinary kind of cruelty, the kind that leaves no marks. And it was working. 3 weeks ago, Nadia had been called into a meeting with HR and informed that there were concerns about her performance trajectory. She had sat in that chair with her hands in her lap and her face perfectly composed and listened to a woman read from a document that described 9 years of her life as a series of manageable but persistent concerns. She had asked for specific examples. She had received documents she had never been shown before. She had said she would like time to review them and respond formally. And they had said, of course. And the meeting had ended, and Nadia had walked back to her desk and sorted the mail and answered 4 emails before she allowed herself to feel any of it. She had not cried then. She cried now, 6 days before the follow-up meeting, sitting alone in a glass-walled office at 7:22 in the morning, because the night before, Rosa had asked why Mama was so tired all the time, and Nadia had said she wasn't. And Rosa had looked at her with those 8-year-old eyes that see everything and said, "You look tired in your face, Mama, even when you smile." That was what was on her face when the door opened and the man she didn't recognize stepped into the outer office and stopped. He was wearing a gray pullover. That was the first thing she registered when she finally looked up because it was wrong. Wrong in the specific way that means someone doesn't belong, the way a single wrong note in a song makes you stop even before you identify it. Nobody on the 14th floor of Ellison and Partners wore gray pullovers. The 14th floor was a dark suit and a good watch floor, a floor of careful shoes and controlled expressions. Men up here had their shirts pressed daily. Women carried bags that cost more than Nadia's monthly rent. The man in the gray pullover was holding a cardboard box, the kind facilities used when moving office supplies between departments. He was average height, a little over 40, and the kind of plane that reads as invisible until you look more carefully. Dark hair, beginning to gray at the temples. Hands that were not soft. He was looking at her through the glass partition with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not discomfort, not the usual flat efficiency of someone delivering a package. Something else. Nadia straightened in her chair. She pressed the backs of her fingers briefly against her eyes. Not enough to be dramatic about it, just enough to clear them. And then she stood and opened the glass door. "Can I help you?" Her voice was even. She had spent 9 years making her voice even. The man looked at her for a moment before he answered. Not rudely, just looking the way people look when they have just seen something they weren't expecting. I'm supposed to drop this in the executive suite, he said. Facilities sent me up. I just started. He indicated the cardboard box with a slight lift. She glanced at the box. Stationery supplies, from the label. She glanced at him. Something in her noticed, and she would think about this later, much later, that his hands were too steady for someone who had just started. People who had just started anywhere always had a small, persistent vibration to them, some frequency of uncertainty that showed in the way they held things or placed their feet. This man was completely still, but she did not think about it then. Then she was simply a woman who had been crying alone at 7:22 in the morning and was now doing the thing she had always done, which was taking care of whatever needed to be taken care of. I'll take it, she said. You can leave it here. I'm supposed to sign for it on delivery. He looked mildly apologetic. She nodded, took the box from him, set it on the corner of the side table, and reached for the clipboard she kept specifically for deliveries. He watched her do this, with that same expression she couldn't name. She held out the clipboard. He signed. She looked at the signature. Neat, economical, the signature of a man who had been signing things for a long time, and then at him. Thank you, she said. The two words she had been trained by the world to say and mean nothing. He didn't move toward the door immediately. He looked at the office around her, at the 3 piles of correspondence, at the color-coded calendar on the secondary screen, at the coffee carafe that was already full and waiting, and then back at her. You've been here a while, he said. It was not a question, which was strange. 9 years, she said, the same way she would have said Tuesday or 42. Just a fact. She was already turning back toward her desk. That's a long time to start that early. She stopped. She looked at him again. In 9 years, no one at Ellison Partners had commented on her hours. Not once. Not in observation, not in gratitude, not in curiosity. They were simply her hours, the hours that made the machine work. And machines don't require acknowledgement. The morning is when I get the most done, she said. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are thinking about something other than the conversation. Then he said, and this was the part she would remember first when she thought back, Are you all right? The question landed like something dropped in still water. She felt the ripple of it go all the way through her before she could stop it. Fine, she said, the word that had become her most fluent language. The man looked at her with those still, dark eyes and said nothing for a moment. The lights in the east stairwell are out, he said finally, as if this were connected. 3rd and 4th floor. I'll put in the request when I go back down. And then he picked up his empty clipboard and left. Nadia stood in the doorway of the glass office for 3 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than she could afford, and watched him go. She didn't think about him again until Thursday. The week between was its own country. Victoria Shaw had scheduled back-to-back department briefings that all required Nadia's coordination, which was either a calculated use of the existing resource before it was removed or a coincidence. And Nadia had decided to treat it as the latter because she could not afford the energy the former would cost her. Rosa had a stomach bug on Wednesday that meant Mrs. Petrov, who charged $40 a day on good days, charged $60 for a sick day watch. And Nadia had driven home Wednesday night, doing the arithmetic in her head and arriving at a number that made her grip the steering wheel too hard. Thursday morning, she was at her desk at 7:15. She had not slept enough. She had eaten half a granola bar in the car because she'd spent the breakfast hour signing Rosa's permission slip for a school trip she could not afford and writing the check, and then not writing the check, and then writing the check. The man in the gray pullover appeared at 7:40. She heard the elevator before she saw him, the particular low sound of the freight elevator, which was different from the passenger cars. And then he was in the hallway outside the glass partition, carrying another cardboard box, wearing the same pullover or one just like it, with an expression that suggested he knew exactly where he was going. He came in without knocking. Facilities people didn't knock. She had noted this before. Morning, he said. Morning. She was already on her second call of the day, a brief with the Singapore coordinator that she was conducting through her earpiece while sorting the overnight messages. She held up one finger without looking at him, indicating the corner of the side table. He set the box down. He did not leave. She completed the call, 3 minutes precise, all 4 action items confirmed, The Seattle time zone adjusted for in her notes and took the earpiece out. He was looking at the wall beside the window, at the organizational chart she had maintained and updated for 9 years, color-coded by department, with a key in the lower left corner that she had designed herself. "You made this," he said. Again, not a question. "The chart is a standard format," she said. "No." He looked at her. "The system behind it. Someone thought this through." She had, in fact, spent 11 hours across 3 weeks building the logic behind the current organizational chart, and had then updated it every quarter without being asked, and had never been acknowledged for it in any context whatsoever. She experienced now the specific disorientation of being seen by someone who should not have the context to see her. "Is there something you needed?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I have a question about the procedures manual." "The procedures manual for this office?" "For the executive suite." He reached into the pocket of the pullover. He had pockets, which also struck her as wrong for this floor, and produced a folded page. He held it out to her. She took it. It was a page from the executive suite procedures manual, the real one, the one she had written and maintained, and which was technically an internal document not distributed to facilities contractors. She looked at the page. She looked at him. "Where did you get this?" "IT sent it as part of the building orientation," he said, with the plausible steadiness of a man who had prepared this answer. She was a woman who noticed things. She noticed, now, that he was watching her face with a careful, contained attention that had nothing to do with a question about the procedures manual. But she was also a woman who had $47 in her checking account until Friday, who had a meeting with HR in 6 days, who had a daughter who had said you look tired in your face, Mama, even when you smile, and she did not have the surplus of mind to pursue the small strangeness of a facilities worker with a procedures manual. So she answered his question. She answered it fully, with the 3 procedural steps that applied, and the one exception that most people missed, and the reason the exception existed. She answered it the way she answered everything, completely, without condescension, without performing the effort of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. But the way he said it was different from the way it was usually said on this floor. She was already reaching for her phone. The 8 a.m. calls would begin in 11 minutes, and she had not yet confirmed the dial-in code with the Tokyo office. "The coffee in the break room is bad," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. "The machine on this floor," he said. "It's been calibrated wrong. Too hot, too fast. Bitter." She stared at him for 1 full second. Then she said, because she was genuinely surprised into honesty, "I've been telling facilities about that machine for 4 months. The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. "I know," he said. And then he picked up his empty box and left. She sat at her desk and looked at the closed door for longer than she should have. Something was not right about him. Something was not adding up. But the Tokyo dial-in code was waiting, and so she turned back to her screen and went to work. It was Victoria Shaw who crystallized it, the way cold water crystallizes into ice. Not gradually, but all at once, in a moment you weren't watching for. It was Friday. Victoria had called a last-minute briefing at noon that required Nadia to prepare 18 printed copies of a 40-page report in 40 minutes. Nadia had done it. She always did it. The copies were collated, the tabs were inserted, the room was set up, and Nadia was standing at the back of the conference room, making sure the presentation display was working when Victoria walked in with the regional directors and looked around the room with the assessing sweep of someone checking a hotel room for cleanliness. Her eyes landed on Nadia and moved past her without stopping, the way eyes move past furniture. "Nadia." Victoria's voice had the particular quality of someone issuing a correction before they've finished deciding what the correction is for. "The agenda. Already at each seat," Nadia said. "In the order I sent this morning?" "Yes." "With a revised appendix?" There had been no revised appendix in what Victoria had sent that morning. Nadia knew this with the complete certainty of a woman who had read every word of every document sent to her for 9 years. "The materials I received didn't include a revision," she said carefully. "If you'd like to share the updated appendix now, I can. The email I sent at 9:15. Victoria's voice was not raised. Victoria never raised her voice. Her voice was always this smooth, room-temperature certainty that made the person it was directed at sound hysterical for objecting. It had the revised appendix attached. "I didn't receive an attachment with the 9:15 email," Nadia said. She kept her voice level. She was an expert at this. "I don't know what to tell you, Nadia." Victoria looked at the regional directors with a compressed, pained expression of a woman managing a difficult situation gracefully. "The email is in my sent folder." The regional directors looked at their agendas. Two of them examined the table. One of them looked at Nadia with an expression that was not unkind but was firmly uninvolved. Nobody said anything. Nadia picked up her tablet. She pulled up her inbox. She turned the screen toward Victoria and showed her the 9:15 email, the one that had arrived, that she had read, that had no attachment. Victoria looked at it. She looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "I'll have IT look into it," and turned to begin the briefing, and the moment closed like water over a stone. Nadia walked to the back of the room. She stood with her tablet in her hands. Her face was composed. She did not cry. She had used that allocation Tuesday morning. When the briefing was over and the room was emptying, she moved efficiently through the space, collecting printed materials, straightening chairs, wiping the whiteboard, and she was nearly done when she became aware that someone was standing in the doorway. She turned. The man in the gray pullover. He was holding a toolbox this time, small, the kind electricians carried, though she had not been informed of any electrical work scheduled for today. He was looking at her with that same expression she still hadn't been able to name. "Wrong floor," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. "The lights," he said. "Recall I mentioned the east stairwell." She did recall. She looked at him. She looked at the toolbox. She looked back at him. "That's not an East Wing issue," she said carefully. "The conference room is west." He looked at her. "I know." The words sat in the room between them. Nadia put down the stack of collected agendas. She looked at this man in the gray pullover with the 2 steady hands and the 2 careful eyes, who asked questions about procedures manuals and knew about her coffee complaint and had apparently followed her after a meeting that should have had nothing to do with him. "Who are you?" she said. He held her gaze. "Someone who was paying attention," he said, and she understood, in the particular way that people understand things they are not yet ready to say out loud, that this was not a complete answer. She picked the agendas back up. She moved toward the door. He stepped aside to let her pass, and she did, and she was 3 steps down the hallway before she stopped. She turned around. "The coffee is fixed," she said. Not a question. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "As of this morning." She turned back toward her desk and kept walking. Behind her, she did not hear him leave immediately. She did not look back to check. The weekend was the kind that cost more than money. Rosa's school trip deposit was $45, due Monday, and Nadia had sent it in an envelope, and then spent Saturday morning trying not to think about whether the check would clear before Friday's payroll, which it probably would not, and then spent Saturday afternoon at the laundromat on 4th Street, which was $2 cheaper than the one on Mercer and took 40 minutes more, and then spent Saturday evening making soup from the 2 sweet potatoes and the half bag of lentils at the back of the cabinet, because Rosa liked soup and because it would last 3 meals, and because $45 was now $45 gone. She was good at this arithmetic. She had been doing it since she was 26. She had gotten better at it every year, the way you get better at anything you cannot afford to fail at. Sunday, she cleaned the apartment and helped Rosa glue her rock collection into a display box for the school science fair. And Rosa held up a piece of rose quartz she had found in the park and said it looked like the inside of a cloud. And Nadia looked at her daughter's face, completely concentrated, completely certain that rose quartz mattered, completely alive to the world, and felt something so large she had to turn toward the window for a moment. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. Monday morning, she was at her desk at 7:10. The 8:45 call was with the Ellison Partners board representatives for the quarterly operating review. Nadia had prepared the briefing materials over the previous 2 weeks. 40 pages of consolidated reporting for separate decks, a supplementary appendix on the International Division performance that had taken 11 hours over 3 evenings because the data from the Manila office had arrived in 3 different formats, and needed to be reconciled by hand. She had everything ready. She always had everything ready. At 8:30, she received an email from Victoria, Shaw's assistant. Not from Victoria directly, never directly, informing her that the operating review materials would need to be restructured to lead with the international division rather than domestic, that this was a board preference that had been communicated to the VP of Internal Operations last week, and that Nadia should make the necessary adjustments before the 8:45 start. She looked at the email. She looked at the clock. 15 minutes. She did not allow herself to feel the specific injustice of the timing. She opened the files and began to work. She was 9 minutes in, moving fast through the restructuring, when she felt someone standing near her desk. She did not look up. 1 minute, she said. Silence. She finished the page she was on, saved, moved to the next section, and then looked up. It was the man in the gray pullover. No box this time. No toolbox. He was just standing there, and he was watching her hands move across the keyboard with an expression that had finally resolved itself into something she could name. He was angry. Not the loud kind. Not the showy kind that fills rooms and demands witnesses. The quiet kind, contained, precise, the kind that comes from a man who has made decisions about how and where he expends his energy, and who is standing in a hallway at 8:31 in the morning, choosing very carefully. 15 minutes, she said, answering the question he hadn't asked. New restructuring request. Board preference. She was already back on the document. He said nothing for a moment. Then, can I help? She looked at him, fully this time, the way she hadn't allowed herself to look at him before. You can't access these files, she said. No, he agreed. But I can hold the ones you've finished and load them in sequence while you work on the deck. She stared at him. You know how to load a presentation deck? I know a few things, he said, and there was something in his voice that she filed away for later, when she had time. She didn't have time now. She handed him the 3 completed sections. She watched his hands. He did not hesitate. He moved to the secondary workstation, the one she used for overflow, the one that required a specific login sequence that was not posted anywhere, and he loaded the files with the ease of a man who had sat in rooms like this one before. She kept working. At 8:43, she printed the final version. At 8:44, she was walking the materials into the conference room. At 8:45, the board representatives were seated, the deck was on the screen, and the quarterly operating review began. She stood at the back of the room, as she always did, present, invisible, available. She did not look at the doorway where she knew he was standing just outside the glass, because she could not afford to look uncertain in this room. And looking at him was beginning to make her feel things she did not have a name for. She looked at the screen instead. The board representative on the international division was reviewing the restructured section, the one she had rebuilt in 15 minutes, and he said, without looking up, "This is very clean. Good analytical structure." No one looked at Nadia. They never looked at Nadia. But when the meeting broke at 10:15 and she moved efficiently through the space, collecting materials and straightening chairs, she found a folded piece of paper on the back corner of the table where she always stood. She waited until she was in the hallway to open it. It was not a note. It was a page from a legal pad with 3 words written on it in the same neat, economical handwriting she had seen on the delivery clipboard. You built that. She folded it and put it in the pocket of her jacket. She went back to her desk and answered her emails and sorted the correspondence and started the afternoon briefing materials, and she did not let herself think about it too much, because too much thinking was a luxury she could not consistently afford. But the 3 words were there, in her pocket, against her side, small and warm, the way a good coal stays warm long after the fire around it has gone out. She was at her desk that same evening at 6:45, long after the last of the 14th floor had gone home, long after the lights in most of the offices had clicked off on their automated schedules, when she opened her computer and found the email from HR. The follow-up meeting had been moved forward. It was now Wednesday morning, 2 days away. The email was 3 sentences long, clinical and clean, the language of a system processing a file. She read it twice. She read it a 3rd time with the particular focus of a woman making sure she has understood every word of a bad thing before she allows herself to feel it. Then she closed the email. She pressed both palms flat against her desk and looked at the middle distance for 11 seconds. She counted because counting was something to do with the mind when the mind needed occupying, and then she straightened her spine and turned back to the briefing materials. The sound of the freight elevator, distant, filtered in through the wall. She didn't look up. She kept working, because this was what she did. This was what she had always done. You kept moving because the alternative was stopping, and stopping was the one thing she could not afford. She did not know that 2 floors below, in a maintenance corridor that smelled of electrical cable and old concrete, a man in a gray pullover was sitting on an equipment crate with a phone in his hand, and that the call he was about to make would not wait until morning. She did not know that the 3 words on the legal pad were the beginning of something, not the end. She did not know yet what was coming. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Mama Told Me. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, and more of them coming your way. The maintenance corridor on the 12th floor was not a place anyone came to think. It was a place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. Narrow, fluorescent lit, smelling of conduit and the particular metallic cold of unused space. The kind of place a building has plenty of and nobody counts. Marcus Ellison had found it on his 2nd day. He had been doing this for 11 days. Not the usual kind of executive walkabout, the choreographed town hall, the glass-walled open-door hour, the curated visibility that communications departments design so that leadership can be seen being accessible without actually becoming so. Those were performances, and Marcus had been performing them for 16 years, and he was very good at them, and they told him almost nothing. What he was doing now was different. It had started with a conversation at a conference in Singapore. A woman who ran a logistics company of 800 people and who had the quiet, total authority of someone who genuinely understood what was happening in every room of her organization. He had asked her how. She had looked at him for a moment, then said, "When did you last do a job in your own company that wasn't your job?" He had not been able to answer. He had thought about it for 6 weeks. And then he had called his chief of staff, told him to arrange a 2-week absence with a standard travel cover story, and walked into the Ellison Partners building on a Tuesday morning in a gray pullover from a sportswear brand he'd bought at an airport, carrying a cardboard box from facilities, wearing a name badge that said D. Morris, contract staff. He had not planned to stay as long as he had. He had planned 3 days, enough to see the rhythm of the place, the real rhythm, the one that existed before the senior staff arrived and after they left. Enough to feel whether the machine he had built was running the way he believed it was. What he had found on the 14th floor, on the first morning, was a woman crying alone at 7:22 a.m. who had dried her eyes and stood up and managed a delivery and answered a technical question with the precision of someone who had been thinking seriously about their work for a very long time, and who had then gone back to her desk and kept working. He had gone back downstairs and pulled her file. 9 years. Performance reviews consistently marked outstanding with a notation. In the first 4 reviews, in the handwriting of the previous VP of operations, that read, "Essential," would be extremely difficult to replace. The last 2 reviews, since Victoria Shaw's appointment, read, "Concerns regarding adaptability to evolving operational priorities." He had read the HR file. He had read the escalation log. He had read the email Victoria Shaw had sent at 9:15 on a Friday morning that had no attachment in the version received by the addressee, and he had read the sent folder version from the server backup, which also had no attachment, and he had understood what he was looking at with the clear, cold comprehension of a man who had been in business long enough to recognize when someone is being managed out of a room they built. He had gone back upstairs in the gray pullover. He had gone back every day since. Now he sat on the equipment crate in the maintenance corridor with his phone in his hand and thought about a woman alone at her desk at 6:45 in the evening, reading an email that moved her termination process forward by 4 days, pressing her palms flat on her desk and counting something silently, and then straightening her spine and going back to work. He made the call. It rang twice. His chief of staff picked up. Marcus. Not surprised. He was never surprised. It was one of the reasons Marcus kept him. "I need you in the office at 7 tomorrow," Marcus said. "Not my office. The building. I'll find you." A pause. "Is there something I should prepare?" "2 things. Marcus looked at the fluorescent light above him, buzzing faintly. Pull everything you can find on the HR process currently active on the 14th floor executive suite. And give me the complete file on Victoria Shaw, not the public one, the real one. Another pause. And the gray pullover. I'll be done with it by 9. He hung up. He sat in the corridor for another 3 minutes. He thought about a woman who had said, "The morning is when I get the most done," with the total absence of self-pity of someone who has accepted a very demanding life and is simply living inside it. He thought about 3 completed presentation sections loaded with the dexterity of someone who had done it themselves, handed without explanation to a maintenance worker because there were 15 minutes and something had to be done, and she was the kind of person who used what was available. He thought about "You look tired in your face, Mama, even when you smile." He had heard it through the open window of the outer office when she had been on the phone during his 3rd visit, her voice careful and warm and slightly strained, and he had not been meant to hear it, and he had stood in the hallway afterward for longer than he intended. He stood up. He put the phone in the pocket of the gray pullover. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for 14. She did not see him come in. She was deep in the supplementary report, the cursor moving through a paragraph she was restructuring for the 3rd time because the syntax was wrong, and wrong syntax in an executive brief was a thing she was constitutionally unable to leave alone. The office around her was dim. She had turned off the overhead lights 2 hours ago because the fluorescence gave her headaches, and she worked better in the light of the screens. And the city outside the window was doing what cities do at 7 p.m. on a Monday, glittering and indifferent. She heard the door. "Office is closed," she said, without looking up. Security occasionally sent someone through the executive floor after hours. It was protocol. "I'll be another hour." Silence. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway of the glass office. Gray pullover. Hands in pockets. The expression she had spent 11 days trying to name. She had named it now. He looked like a man who had been watching something go wrong for long enough that he had finally decided to stop watching. "The follow-up meeting," she said. "Not why are you here? Not how did you get in? Just the thing that was in her mind, the thing that had been sitting in her chest all day since the email, the Wednesday morning meeting that now had her name on it like a target." "I know," he said. "You keep saying that." She set down her pen. She looked at him directly, the way she had been carefully not looking at him for 11 days. "You know about the meeting. You know about the coffee machine. You know about the email with no attachment. You know things that a facilities contractor who's been here 11 days shouldn't know." He didn't look away. "Who are you?" she said. And this time it wasn't a question she was asking in passing, between tasks, with a phone call waiting. This time it was the only thing in the room. He came in from the doorway and sat down in the chair across from her desk, the chair where, in a normal order of things, she sat when she was taking notes for the person who owned this office. He sat in it like he knew where the arms were, like he had sat in it before. She watched him do this. Something moved through her slowly, the way understanding moves when it is large, not arriving all at once, but assembling, piece by piece, the way you assemble a picture from a puzzle when you haven't seen the box and you're working only from the shapes. The 2 steady hands, the procedures manual, the server backup, the maintenance corridor access, the way he had loaded the presentation files without hesitation on a workstation that required a non-standard login that was not documented anywhere. The way he looked at the organizational chart she had built as if he recognized the thinking behind it. The way he had said "I know" when she described the meeting. Not "I heard" or "I'm sorry to hear," but "I know," present tense, the knowledge of a man with access to a thing rather than news of it. "Your name isn't Morris," she said. "No," he said. She looked at the chair he was sitting in. The chair across from the desk of the CEO of Ellison Partners. The chair where, in the normal order of things, visitors sat. The person who owned this office, who was traveling in Europe, whose absence had been covered by a standard communications protocol, whose name was on the building in the lobby and on the plaque by the elevator and on the letterhead of every document she had processed for 9 years. That person had dark hair going gray at the temples and hands that were not soft, and a signature that was neat and economical. The signature of someone who had been signing things for a long time. She had seen that signature on a delivery clipboard. The silence in the room was absolute. "Marcus Ellison," she said. It was not a question. He held her gaze. Yes. Nadia Reyes sat across from her employer, across from the man whose office this was, whose company this was, whose name was on the building she had arrived at before everyone else for 9 consecutive years. And she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very carefully, "You've been here all week." 11 days. As contract facilities staff. A pause. D. Morris. The D. David. My middle name. She looked at her hands on the desk. She looked at the 3 piles of correspondence she had sorted that morning. She looked at the color-coded calendar on the secondary screen, the one he had stood and looked at, and said someone thought this through. The feeling that was moving through her now was not what she would have predicted. It was not embarrassment, though the thought of crying alone at 7:22 a.m. while Marcus Ellison stood 12 feet away, carrying a cardboard box, was something she would need to set aside carefully and examine later when she was alone. It was not anger, though that was there too, small and precise, coiled somewhere beneath everything else, and she would need to look at that later too. The feeling that was moving through her was something closer to the feeling she had in the laundromat on Saturday. The particular vertiginous knowledge that you have been visible to the wrong people for a very long time, and now, suddenly, without warning, you have been seen. The HR meeting, she said. You moved it. I didn't move it. Victoria moved it. He watched her. I haven't interfered with any of the processes that were already in motion. I wanted to see them run, to see what they were. Yes. She looked at him. And now you've seen. Now I've seen. The city glittered outside the window. The screens hummed their quiet, steady hum. Nadia Reyes sat very still in her chair and held the weight of 11 days rearranging themselves in her memory. Every small exchange, every question about procedures, every moment of being seen that she had filed away and not examined too closely, because examining things closely was expensive and she had not had the surplus. The report I restructured in 15 minutes, she said. On Monday. Yes. The board representative said the analytical structure was clean. I know. You were outside the glass. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You wrote the note. Yes. She pressed her lips together briefly. Then she looked at him, directly, without the careful management she usually brought to this office, without the composed professional distance that was as much a uniform as the lanyard she wore, and she said the thing she had not allowed herself to say to anyone in 9 years. I am very good at this job. It came out steady. It came out certain. It was not a request for confirmation. It was a woman who had carried the knowledge of her own competence alone for a very long time and had finally set it down in the presence of someone who could weigh it accurately. Marcus Ellison looked at her. I know, he said, and this time the 2 words had an entirely different shape. He was at his desk at 8 the next morning. His actual desk. The one in the glass-walled office on the 14th floor, where Nadia Reyes had been arriving at 7 every morning for 9 years, where the coffee was now correctly calibrated, where the organizational chart she had built covered the wall by the window. He was wearing a suit. It was dark, well-cut. He had a watch on that caught the morning light. He looked like the CEO of a company that bore his name, which was what he had always been, and the effect on the 14th floor when he stepped out of the elevator at 7:58 was immediate and total. The accounts manager, who had been laughing at something on his phone, put the phone in his drawer. The 2 junior associates who had been discussing weekend plans at the printer stopped discussing them and went back to their desks. The woman from legal who passed through the executive floor every morning to collect the overnight correspondence from the physical inbox walked past the elevator bank, glanced up, registered what she was seeing, and walked considerably faster. Nadia was at her desk. She had been there since 7. She had processed the overnight correspondence, started the coffee, updated the calendar, and sorted the morning's briefing materials, and she was on the phone with the Tokyo coordinator confirming the week's dial-in schedule when Marcus stepped off the elevator. She had known he was coming. They had spoken for 40 minutes the previous evening, and what had been said in those 40 minutes had been careful and clear and, on his side, completely without the hedging and performance of a man managing a liability. He had spoken to her the way she had always worked, directly, without wasted words, with the complete attention of someone who understood that the details mattered. She had listened. She had responded. She had asked the 3 questions that needed to be asked. She had received 3 complete answers. And then she had gone home, made Rosa a cheese sandwich, helped her add 2 new specimens to the raw collection display, and sat at the kitchen table after Rosa was asleep and allowed herself, for exactly 20 minutes, to feel everything she had been keeping in the back of the cabinet, like the sweet potatoes and the lentils, rationed, managed, saved for when there was nothing else. She cried for 6 of those 20 minutes. The rest of the time, she sat quietly and breathed and looked at the kitchen window, and then she went to bed. In the morning, she woke at 5:30. She made Rosa's lunch. She told her the school trip was going to be wonderful. She drove to the office in the car with 180,000 miles on it and talked to it gently up the hill on Delaney Street. And she parked, and she went in. She was ready. At 9:15, Marcus's chief of staff, a man named Theo, efficient, watchful, sent a meeting invitation to Victoria Shaw's calendar. The subject line read, Executive Suite, Operational Review, Urgent. At 9:20, Victoria Shaw's assistant called Nadia's extension, which was unusual. Victoria's people communicated with Nadia only through email as a matter of established practice. Do you know what this is about? The assistant said. I wouldn't have that information, Nadia said pleasantly. But the meeting is in 40 minutes. I'd suggest being prompt. She said it with complete, even warmth. No edge. No satisfaction in her voice that anyone could have pointed to and named. Just the efficient courtesy of a woman doing her job. She went back to the briefing materials. At 9:55, Victoria Shaw walked into the executive suite conference room. She was wearing her best structured blazer. Her hair was precisely arranged. She had the composed expression of a woman who was very good at conference rooms and knew it. She did not register Nadia at her desk as she passed. She never did. At 10 o'clock, Marcus Ellison walked into the conference room. Theo followed and closed the door. Nadia could see them through the glass. Marcus at the head of the table, Theo to his left, Victoria across from them. Her posture still excellent, her expression beginning its first small adjustments as she took in the room and understood that this was not the meeting she had been told it was. Nadia did not watch. She turned back to her screen. She was not a woman who needed to see the reckoning to know it was happening. She had built 9 years of career on doing things correctly and trusting that correctly done work spoke for itself. The fact that it had not always been heard did not mean she had ever stopped saying it. The meeting ran 42 minutes. When the door opened, Theo came out first, nodded briefly to Nadia, which he had never done before, and walked toward the elevator. Victoria Shaw came out second. She was not wearing the composed expression anymore. She was wearing the expression of a woman who has just been shown, in plain language with documented evidence and no room for reframing, the full inventory of what she has done. She walked past Nadia's desk without stopping. Nadia was on the phone. She did not look up. She was managing the 11 a.m. call arrangements. She did her job. Then Marcus came to the doorway of the conference room. He looked at her. He waited until she had finished the call. Nadia. She looked up. When you have a moment, he said, I'd like to talk to you about a few things. She saved her document. She picked up her notebook, the one with the color-coded tabs, the one she had been using for 9 years, the one where the pages were dense with the organized intelligence of a woman who had been paying complete attention every single day and recording what she found. She stood up. I have a moment now, she said. The conversation lasted 2 hours, not because there was drama in it, not because anyone raised their voice or made speeches or said things designed to be remembered. It lasted 2 hours because Marcus Ellison had questions, real ones, the kind that come from a man who has discovered a gap between what he believed about his own company and what his company actually was. And Nadia Reyes had answers, because she had always had the answers. And the answers were detailed and specific and grounded in 9 years of paying close attention to a building full of people who had largely paid attention to everything except her. She told him about the Manila data, how it arrived in 3 different formats every quarter, how she had built a reconciliation process herself over 2 weekends 3 years ago, because the alternative was inaccurate reporting at the board level, how the process existed in a document she had stored in the shared drive under a folder titled Administrative Procedures. supplementary, because there had been no formal channel through which to surface it as a contribution rather than just a task. Completed. He looked at her for a long moment after she said that. Then he wrote something down. She told him about the Singapore coordinator and the shellfish allergy, not as a complaint, but as an example of the kind of information that lived in her head and nowhere else, that would leave the building the day she did, that had no formal home in any system because no system had been built to hold it. He wrote something else down. She told him, carefully and without performance, about the 9 months of Victoria Shaw's tenure, not as a grievance, but as a sequence of events that she had documented in her own records. Every email, every meeting notation, every instance of a deadline moved or a standard shifted without notice. She had brought the folder. She set on the table between them and said, "I wasn't sure I'd have occasion to use this." She paused. "I wanted to have it anyway." He looked at the folder. He looked at her. He said, "How long did it take you to put this together?" "I've been maintaining it for 7 months," she said. "About 15 minutes a day." He was quiet for a moment. "In addition to everything else." "In addition to everything else," she confirmed. He opened the folder. He read. He read carefully, with the specific quality of attention she had learned to recognize in him over 11 days. The attention of a man who does not skim, who does not summarize before finishing, who believes that the details are where the truth lives. When he closed the folder, he set it aside and looked at her. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer it without factoring in what you think the expected answer is." She waited. "In 9 years," he said, "what should have been different?" Nadia looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at him. "The work I was doing," she said, "and the role I held were not the same thing." He nodded once, slowly. "The work I was actually doing, the reconciliation systems, the operational procedures, the institutional knowledge that exists in that folder and in my head and in files I built on my own time because there was no formal mechanism for them. That work is not executive secretary work." She said it without apology, without inflation. Just clearly the way she said everything. It is operations work. It is process architecture. It is the kind of work that, in a company this size, should have a title and a budget and a team. Marcus Ellison looked at her for a long time. "You're right," he said. The 2 words landed in the room. She did not rush to fill the silence after them. "I want to make you a formal offer," he said. "Director of Operational Infrastructure. It's a new position. I'm creating it because it describes work that has been happening in this building for at least 9 years that we have not had the structural honesty to name." He held her gaze. "I'd like you to build a role. Define the scope, the team structure, the mandate. Bring me a proposal in 3 weeks." Nadia Reyes sat across from Marcus Ellison in the conference room of the office. She had been arriving at before everyone else for 9 consecutive years, and she was quiet for a very specific moment. The moment of a woman who is not doubting, but absorbing, who is making sure the thing she is receiving is as real as it sounds before she allows her body to understand it. "The compensation," she said. He named a number. She kept her expression steady. The number was more than twice her current salary. The number was the kind of number that meant Rose's school trip without checking the bank balance first. The number was the kind of number that meant the car could rest. "I'd like that in writing before end of day," she said. "You'll have it within the hour," he said. She nodded. She closed her notebook. She looked at him. "I have one question," she said. "Yes." The gray pullover. A pause. Was it always planned to be 11 days? Something crossed his face, the first fully unguarded expression she had seen from him, quick and almost rueful. 3 days, he said. Then I found the organizational chart. She stood. She picked up her notebook and the documented folder. She looked at him one more time. "The coffee in the 4th floor break room," she said, "has been wrong since March." She walked out of the conference room and back to her desk. She sat down. She put her notebook in its place. She straightened the 3 piles of correspondence. Then she allowed herself, very briefly, to press both hands flat on the desk and breathe. Just breathe. The city outside the window was doing what it always did, enormous, indifferent moving. The screens hummed. The coffee carafe was full. Everything looked exactly the way it had looked this morning, when she had arrived, when she had sat down, when it was just another day in a building full of people who moved past her like she was part of the furniture. It looked the same, but the weight of it was completely different. She picked up the phone. She called Theo to arrange the written offer. She called the Tokyo coordinator to reschedule a timing conflict. She answered 3 emails. She did her job, because it was her job now in a way it had not quite been before. Not the job of someone holding the machine together from behind the wall, invisible, unacknowledged, essential, and uncounted, but the job of someone who had been seen clearly and completely and found to be exactly what she had always been. The 14th floor had known something was happening before the conference room door had opened. Floors like this one have a particular sensitivity to atmospheric change, the way certain animals sense a storm by the pressure in the air rather than any visible sign of cloud. The junior associates felt it in the quality of the morning silence. The accounts manager felt it when Theo walked through on his way to the elevator. I did not make eye contact with anyone. The woman from legal felt it when she collected the morning correspondence and noticed that the chair arrangement in the executive suite conference room had changed. When Victoria Shaw walked out of that conference room and through the executive suite and past Nadia's desk without stopping and pressed the elevator button and stood waiting for the doors to open, the particular quality of her posture communicating everything to everyone who knew how to read it, the 14th floor understood. Nobody said anything. This was not a floor of people who said things in hallways. But there are many ways to say something without saying it, and the 14th floor said it in all of them. The accounts manager, who had laughed at his phone at 7:58, did not laugh at anything for the rest of the day. The 2 junior associates who had been discussing weekend plans at the printer went and found things to do at their desks. The woman from legal, on her way back to the elevator, paused at the end of the corridor. She looked at Nadia at her desk. She said, clearly, simply in the way that requires courage on floors like this, "Good morning, Nadia." Nadia looked up. "Good morning, Sandra." Sandra went to the elevator. The doors closed. She was gone, but she had said it. That was what Mama always knew about these moments, that the reckoning doesn't always arrive with fanfare and retribution and the theatrical satisfaction of the powerful being brought low in full view of everyone who suffered under them. Sometimes the reckoning is a woman saying good morning in a hallway and meaning it differently than she meant it yesterday, and both of them knowing the difference. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing true is simple. The director of operational infrastructure role took not 3 weeks to propose, but 6, because Nadia was not a woman who submitted incomplete work, and the proposal she built was 42 pages long, structured in 4 sections, with a budget model in the appendix, and a 3-year staffing plan, and a full audit of the institutional knowledge currently held in her head, and in personally maintained files that needed to be formalized, transferred, and made resilient to individual absence. She had written in the cover note, in her careful, unhurried handwriting, "A system that depends on one person knowing everything is not a system. It is a risk." This proposal addresses the risk. Marcus had read it in a single sitting. He had approved it the same day, with one addition in the margin at the end. Well said. She had started building the team in the 3rd month. She had hired 2 people. One of them was a woman named Cora who had been doing invisible operations work in the finance department for 6 years and who cried briefly and composedly when Nadia offered her the position, not from surprise that she'd been offered a job, but from the specific, overwhelming sensation of having someone look at your work and call it by its right name. Nadia had understood that completely. She had given Cora a moment and then passed her the role description and said, "Tell me where this needs to be better." And Cora had composed herself and told her 3 things, all of them correct, and they had been good colleagues ever since. The 4th floor coffee machine had been fixed in the 2nd week. Nadia had submitted the work order herself. It was not her department. She submitted it anyway, because it was a problem she knew how to fix, and the floor below her contained people who deserved better coffee, and doing good work had never required her to first establish jurisdiction. Underscore. Rosa found out on a Saturday. Not for Nadia, Nadia had been processing it herself, carefully, in the evenings after Rosa was asleep, in the specific way she processed large things, which was quietly and without witnesses. She had told Mrs. Petrov there might be some scheduling changes, and Mrs. Petrov had said, "Good, you worked too hard and gone back inside." It was Rosa who found out on a Saturday, because Rosa was 8 and 8-year-olds operate on a different information system entirely. She found out when Nadia said yes to the school trip without checking her phone. Rosa noticed. She noticed the way children notice things that adults have learned not to mark. The absence of the particular pause, the quick calculation, the imperceptible tightening around the eyes that meant money in the language all children of careful mothers learn to read. "You didn't check," Rosa said. "No," Nadia said. Rosa looked at her with those 8-year-old eyes. "Did something good happen?" Nadia looked at her daughter. The rock collection was on the shelf behind her. 47 specimens now, each one cataloged in Rosa's own careful notebook, the rose quartz in the front, because it was her favorite, because it looked like the inside of a cloud. "Something good happened," Nadia said. Rosa considered this. Then she said, with the specific precision of a child who asks the real question rather than the polite one, "Is it going to last?" Nadia looked at her for a long moment. "I built it," she said. "So yes." Rosa seemed satisfied with this. She went back to her rock collection. She picked up the rose quartz and turned it in the light. Nadia watched her daughter hold the small, luminous thing, and she thought, the way you think the thoughts that have been waiting their whole lives to be thought, about what it meant to do something completely without recognition for 9 years. What it cost, what it built underneath the cost, in the places you couldn't see while you were still inside it. She thought about a Tuesday morning at 7:22 and a cardboard box and a man who wore a gray pullover and asked, "Are you all right?" in a hallway while she was filing the grief away and going back to work. She thought about what Mama always knew about kindness, not the version that waits for its own reward, but the version that has no idea it's being watched, the version you do because you're who you are, not because the world is watching, not because the record will reflect it. She had carried that understanding her whole working life. She had carried it in the extra hours, in the reconciliation documents no one asked for, in the shellfish allergy logged in her personal notebook, in the 15 minutes of restructuring that saved a board presentation while no one said her name. That was the kindness, not the perform kind, the daily, unremarkable, completely genuine kind, the kind that is simply what you do when you are a person raised to believe that doing your work fully is its own form of dignity, and that dignity is not contingent on being seen. She had been unseen for 9 years, and then someone had looked, and what he had found, looking, was not a woman who needed rescue. It was a woman who had already done the work, who had built the systems and maintained the knowledge and kept the machine running, alone, in the early morning, with a daughter who could read the calculation in her eyes and $47 until Friday, who was, it turned out, exactly as good as she had always known she was. Underscore. Marcus Ellison did not stay in the gray pullover. Of course he didn't. He went back to being what he was, the man in the dark suit with the watch that caught the light. And the company moved forward with the particular momentum of a large organization that has had something true named about itself and is now adjusting to the naming. But he did one more thing. 3 months after the conference room conversation, he had the organizational chart updated. The full one. The public-facing version that went in the annual report, the one with every name and title and department structure laid out for anyone who wanted to look. At the top of the new operations function, in the position that had been created because it described work that had been happening for 9 years without a name, the chart read, Director of Operational Infrastructure, Reyes. He had not told her it was going in the annual report. She had found it herself, the way she found most things, by paying attention, by reading the document before it was distributed, because that was her job, because the morning was when she got the most done. She had sat at her desk at 7:31 a.m. with the draft annual report open on her screen, and she had found her name on the organizational chart, in the position she had built, in the role that finally said out loud what she had been doing for 9 years. She had pressed the backs of her fingers briefly against her eyes. Then she had sent 3 emails, taken 1 call, and gotten on with the day. Because that was who she was. That was who she had always been. And now, finally, completely, on paper and in the building and in the room, the world knew it too. Underscore. Mama always said that the people who build things in the dark, who do the work no one names, and hold the knowledge no one asks for, and show up before everyone else and stay after everyone leaves, those people are not waiting for rescue. They're not waiting at all. They're already doing the thing. What they deserve is not charity, not pity, not even gratitude, exactly. What they deserve is what Nadia Reyes finally received on a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building that bore someone else's name. They deserve to be seen, really seen, fully seen. The way you see someone when you set down everything you already believe about them and look at what is actually there. And what is actually there? In the woman who arrives before the building wakes up, in the man who reconciles the data no one else can read, in the person who holds 9 years of institutional memory in their head and their private folders because no system was built to hold it. What is actually there is almost always exactly what the world needed and forgot to ask for. Mama said, the work you do in the dark is not lost. It is building something. And when the light comes, it will illuminate not just what you have done, but who you have become in the doing of it. Nadia Reyes knew this. She had known it for years, in the specific, unspoken way that people know things they have not yet had occasion to say out loud. She knew it when she pressed her palms flat on her desk and counted to 11. She knew it when she said, I'm very good at this job, and meant it as a fact, not a plea. She knew it when Rosa held the rose quartz to the light and said it looked like the inside of a cloud. She knows it now, and so do you. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. Mama always said the people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, I think you'll find the other videos on your screen are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. There's always a story waiting at Mama Told Me.